Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another online causal inference seminar. It's good to be back. Today, we have Dylan Small from UPenn talking about exploration, confirmation, and replication in the same observational study, a two-team cross-screening approach to studying the effect of unwanted pregnancy on mothers' later life outcomes. So we look forward to the talk. And the discussion today will be led by Ying from Harvard University. So look forward to that as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A, I'm assuming still. And Naoki will be handling questions, so I'll just switch over to him for a brief moment.
Yeah, so thanks, Emma. So as Emma said, please submit your questions in Q&A button, not in the chat. I'm gonna stop Dhiren time to time and then ask questions. So without further ado, Dhiren, floor is yours. Thanks for coming.
And there we go.
That's it. Successfully shared. Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Em and Naoki and all the organizers for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be able to share this work. So it's so the main thing I'll be presenting is joint work with Samrat Roy, Marina Bogomolov, Ruth Heller, Amy Claridge, and Tishra Beeson, and I'll talk about some work with Will Beckerman that's related at the end. Motivating example of this work is a study of looking at the effect of unwanted pregnancies on later life outcomes for mothers. So, now in 24 countries, abortion is completely illegal, and in the U.S., which it's illegal now in some states following the Dobbs v. Jackson decision. So this makes it important from a policy point of view to understand what's the effect of carrying an unwanted pregnancy to term on mothers who don't have an option for abortion. So there have been some study of short-term effects, like less emotional attachment to the baby in pregnancy, more parenting stress, but we're looking at interested in the longer-term effects where there hasn't been much study. And so we identified this data set, which I think is good for studying this question. So this is the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study. So it's a random sample of it started in 1957 with people who were graduating from high school in Wisconsin that year, and they randomly sampled a third of all graduates that year, and then they followed them up about 10 years, and it's a very nice data. I mean, there's fairly little attrition. It's a very rich data set, and they asked them when the participants were around age 36 about they asked women what was your birth history, and whether each pregnancy the woman had, they asked whether the pregnancy was wanted. No, so this isn't to be more specifically, they asked, before you became pregnant, did you want to become pregnant at that time? If the woman said no, she was asked, did you want to have another baby sometime? So it would be it was considered an unwanted pregnancy if she answered no to both those questions. So now this is, of course, not as ideal as asking the woman right at the time of the pregnancy, was it wanted, but it's a lot better than asking a woman, when the child's grown up, was the pregnancy wanted. So it's somewhat contemporaneous. So other good aspects of this, the WLS data for studying this question of the effect of unwanted pregnancy on mothers, is that they have this long-term follow-up. So they have, at age 53, 65, and 72, a whole host of mental health, physical health, economic, social, and cognition outcomes. And they have a rich set of prospectively measured confounding variables, so, including they asked about socioeconomic status when growing up. They have a measure of adolescent IQ. They asked about what were the person's aspirations for what they wanted to, how much education they wanted to get in when they were in high school. You know, what was their future occupational goals. So it's a very nice data set for this question. And so we wanted to use it to study this question. We're thinking about, okay, sort of three aspects of obtaining reliable evidence from observational study are using exploratory data analysis, confirmatory data analysis, and replication. So let me just say a little more about what I mean by each of these aspects. So first, John Tukey is considered like the father of exploratory data analysis, and he said exploratory data analysis is detective work. So it's kind of like in the criminal trial analogy, think about it, it's like before this trial, you're trying to sort of follow hunches and leads to establish pretrial evidence about a suspect. So some of the things that EDA can help with are forming unanticipated hypotheses. Before the data, you explore the data, you find out things that you didn't expect and hypothesize about. You can remove outliers that don't represent natural variation. Or another thing I found oftentimes in my own work is kind of like there's a variable that you thought it measured something, and then you start looking at, you do some EDA and you realize, oh, that's not really, it does not measure, it's not behaving like I expected. And you sort of look into it and maybe it's not quite measuring what you thought, and maybe there's something else that measures it better. So that's EDA. Now, and sort of in the criminal trial analogy, confirmatory data analysis is like the trial. The EDA establishes the suspect, and then you have this trial. Why do you need that? So confirmatory data analysis is like doing the hypothesis test once you establish the hypothesis. So why do you need that rigorous trial? This is a good quote, I think, but suspicion is a thing very few people can entertain without letting the hypothesis turn in their minds into fact. So there's this natural sort of confirmation bias we as humans have of like, we have this thing we think is, we get this hypothesis in our mind that we get invested in, and then there's like the natural tendency to kind of look for things that support it and dismiss things that don't support it. So we need sort of a rigorous test that's pre-specified and is not subject to confirmation bias. Now, the third aspect I want to talk about, kind of that's helpful for reliable evidence, is replication. So, I mean, in general, replication is an important, scientific principle. So this is like from a National Academy of Sciences report. Repeated findings of comparable results tend to confirm the veracity of an original scientific conclusion, and by the same token, repeated failures to confirm throw the original conclusions into doubt. Now, in observational studies specifically, there's a type of replication that's particularly useful, which is that you have sort of you try to find the same effect, but in studies that have different potential hidden biases. So, for example, let's say you did looking at the effect of eating fish, on people's health. Let's say you do the study you do one study in Philadelphia, and we find, okay, people who eat fish tend to be healthier. And then you do another study in Boston, and you also find people who eat fish tend to be healthier. It's not, I mean, the concern in Philadelphia would be, okay, people maybe who are eat, fish tends to be more expensive in cities, and people who eat fish maybe are kind of like more like focused on a healthy lifestyle, and so it may be either socioeconomic or kind of there are other health behaviors that are actually driving the better outcome with fish eaters and not the fish. If you do the study in Boston, you'd worry about the same thing. So the Boston's not really adding that much extra information. What's more powerful as a replication and observational studies is if you have consistency among studies with different hidden biases. So, for example, there was a study done in Norway where I looked at the health of specifically breast cancer among wives of fishermen versus wives of other workers of similar income. So now that study may have its own bias. Maybe, fishermen live in more rural areas. Maybe that has some effect on the health. So that study may be biased, but it's not going to be biased by the same kind of like income differences, or that people eating fish tend to just maybe more health conscious. Here the wives of fishermen eating a lot of fish because probably their husband is bringing home extra fish they couldn't sell. So if you have two different studies of different bias, and you find an effect in both, in order for there to be no effect, you'd have to have two different biases simultaneously operating. So that's kind of a more powerful replication. And so in our study, we thought about two groups, Catholic women and non-Catholic women. They may have specifically, the Catholic Church against birth control, and that was probably like a bigger deal in like that. So by the way, these women were typically, if they were getting pregnant, it was around the 1960s, early 1970s. So the Catholics, there was kind of maybe more following of the Catholic Church being against birth control. Also, by the way, abortion was illegal in Wisconsin during that time, prior to 1973, before the Roe v. Wade decision. So we thought, okay, that relatively maybe there's some differences in the confounding, that the reason Catholic women might have an unwanted pregnancy might have more to do with, maybe in some women's case, the opposition to the church's opposition to birth control than in non-Catholic women. So if we could find an effect in both groups, that might be stronger evidence. So oftentimes, you think about doing exploratory data analysis on one part, and then sort of, one data set, then trying to confirm it, another data set, and replication, another data set. But in our case, the WLS has some unique strengths for our question. Questions about unwanted pregnancy are not typically there in most data sets, and they're not typically, and if they are, they're sort of maybe asked after the child's grown up. So we've got that question, we've got this long-term follow-up. We don't really have another data set that has these strengths that we were aware of. So the question is kind of, can we combine exploratory data analysis, confirmatory data analysis, and replication all in the same study? So the approach we came up with for doing this is does the WLS have data on children? Well, no. I guess in the sense they have they just follow up the respondent. They don't ask questions about they don't ask questions of the children. They do that. There is a lot of information about. They do ask questions about the. I think that maybe in later surveys, they may have some questions about asking about relationship with children. But they don't ask questions of the children themselves. Okay, so here's the approach we came up with. We call it two-team cross-screening. We divided into two teams. So the two teams were Samrat, Samrat and myself and Amy, and then the other team was Ruth, Marina, and Tishra. So each team had two statisticians on it, and then Amy and Tishra are experts in maternal health and psychology relating to unwanted pregnancies. And so, okay, so then team A, which is my team, we did exploratory data analysis on the Catholic data. And then based on that, we prepared an analysis plan that would control the family-wise error rate at 0.025 that would then be applied to the non-Catholic data. Then the other team explored the non-Catholic data and prepared an analysis plan that controlled the family-wise error rate at 0.025 for the Catholic data. So then Team A's plan was run on the non-Catholic data. Team B's plan was run on the Catholic data. By Bonferroni, any finding is valid with a 0.05 family-wise error rate that was found on either the confirmation analyses. And if both teams found the same thing on the confirmation analyses, then that would be a replicable outcome. And there's this notion of sort of family-wise error rate for replicable outcomes that was be controlled at 0.05. So the advantage is, we get to do EDA, but also do confirmatory data analysis and have a chance of replication. So just to give some detail, so the way we controlled for confounding this study was risk set matching. Lots of other ways to do it. So we did. So in usual matching, you would match, treat, and control people on measured confounders. If there were no unmeasured confounders, you could analyze like a match pair randomized experiment. But the problem here is the treatment of unwanted pregnancy is time varying. So let's say we were to match an education. A woman who had an unwanted pregnancy at age 20 might stop her education as a result. And if we match her to a woman who either had a wanted pregnancy or didn't have a pregnancy at all, she could be matched to a woman with unwanted pregnancy at age 20 could be matched to a woman who just hasn't had any pregnancy or has had a wanted pregnancy. So let's say we match her to a woman who has a wanted pregnancy at age 20. And the woman who's a wanted pregnancy at age 20 might stop her education at age 20 also. But the difference is the woman who wanted the pregnancy, maybe she's stopping it sort of, she was totally fine with stopping. It was the woman with unwanted pregnancy might have really not wanted to stop it, but had this unwanted pregnancy. So the two women aren't comparable. And the problem is because you're matching education after the pregnancy is a post-treatment variable, and so matching on a post-treatment variable can cause bias. So the risk set matching, the idea is you only match on covariates up to the time of treatment. So in this case, if you're matching, you match sequentially in time, and if you get it, so when you keep matching women with unwanted pregnancy to women who hadn't had an unwanted pregnancy up to that time, and the covariates you match on are only up to that time. So if you're looking at a woman who had an unwanted pregnancy at age 20, you only match on education up to age 20, not total education. So this shows the love plots for matching in the Catholic and non-Catholic women of the variables we matched on. So the circle, these are standardized differences. This is a difference in standard deviations and between the treated the women with unwanted pregnancy and the controls, women who had an unwanted pregnancy up to that time. And generally in matching, you're trying to get standardized differences below 0.2, and so that you see, before matching, you have some variables that were standardized differences above 0.2, but after the x's after match, they're all below 0.2. So the things we matched are things like socioeconomic status growing up, some personality variables, whether you were married at the time, again, only up to the time of the unwanted pregnancy, things about their high school rank, things about whether you'd had a depression prior to the unwanted pregnancy, and age. So in general, we have this match pair set up of with Catholic and non-Catholic women. And before we broke into, let's see, we have some in the chat. Okay, so asking, is the family-wise area for replicability be sort of among that your claims of a replicable outcome that you would make at most if there are no replicable outcomes, the chance that the chance you would make a false claim about a replicable outcome would be at most any replicable outcome would be most 0.05. So before breaking into the teams, we met as a whole group and we just discussed some of there's thousands of outcomes in this WLS, and they're at different ages, but we just discussed kind of like had a group what outcomes we might consider important. This doesn't limit the groups, but at least we'd sort of be on the same page about some things we might consider important. So we identified 5 domains: depression, psychological well-being, physical health, alcohol usage, and economic well-being. And we're looking at these things start to be measured in the women's 50s and then in their 60s and 70s. And we also wanted to compare our approach to two other approaches. So one is the approach I worked on with Qing Yuan and Paul Rosenbaum called automated cross screening. So in automated cross screening, it also sort of divides the data set into 2 pieces, and you use piece 1 you examine piece 1 to decide what to test in piece 2, and you have a 0.025 plan for analyzing piece 2, and you look at piece 2, examine piece 2 to make a plan for what to test in piece 1, again with a 0.025 family-wise error rate. The difference is that because there's not 2 teams, you can't do EDA in both pieces of the data, because if you do you have to have a pre-specified plan of how you're going to examine each piece to propose what to test in the other piece. Because if you examined piece A to propose a plan for piece B, when you get to piece B, you already know what's in piece A, so you can't do EDA on piece B to propose a plan for piece A. So we were going to compare to automated cross screening, where the pre-specified plan is that we would look at all these outcomes in the Catholics. Anything that was below p-value 0.025, let's say we had 3 outcomes at p-value 0.025, then we're going to use Bonferroni-Holm on the non-Catholics with those 3 outcomes. And then you do the same thing with the non-Catholics. You look at these pre-specified outcomes. Anything below 0.025, you will use Bonferroni-Holm on the Catholics. And the other thing we're going to compare to is just kind of a standard thing where we just take these pre-specified outcomes and just do Bonferroni-Holm on the full data. So let me okay, so let me talk about the EDA that my team did. So we're looking at the Catholic data. So we first looked at sort of these outcomes that the whole group had identified, which included, okay, so one of the things we looked at was depression at age 53. So here you see this is overall depression. So a higher score is more depressed. And this is, these are the controls, and these are women with unwanted pregnancies. So you see it is higher among women with unwanted pregnancy. And this is, this effect, by the way, is about the same as kind of if you would look at the difference in depression among women who went to college versus high school, or married versus unmarried, which are considered sort of some of the substantial risk factors for depression. So it's a meaningful kind of point estimate. And these are some of so this is an overall score, and these are some of the subscale. This is like depressed mood, interpersonal problems, low positive affect, and somatic problems. we saw similar results at age 65, not quite as significant. So we considered kind of trying to combine these scales in sort of the most significant combination and stuff, but Amy thought that who was our kind of maternal health expert, I mean, she thought it was most meaningful since there wasn't one scale that kind of stood out. It was most meaningful to just test overall depression. We also considered, should we do different ages? We decided to focus on age 53. It was the most significant, and we thought, and it was kind of at a point women, would kind of be in their working life, but at most hadn't reached retirement. So we thought it'd be interesting to focus on that as kind of a point. We hope women's life would have stabilized from any effects of the unwanted pregnancy, but it seems like maybe there's still a substantial effect. So here's another outcome. So psychological well-being, there are different aspects of psychological well-being they asked. So there didn't seem to be any difference in most of the aspects, but there was a difference. So self-acceptance. So this is one of the aspects of self-acceptance. They ask, when I look at the story of my life, I am pleased with how things have turned out, and going from agree strongly 7 to disagree strongly 1. So higher is better in terms of self-acceptance. And so it looks like the controls are less happy with their, they're more happy with their life. So women with unwanted pregnancy are less happy with their life. So we decided that's something we were going to try to test. We thought that was interesting. Again, we decided age 65, we did see similar results, but not quite as significant. We decided to focus on age 53. In terms of physical health, we didn't see any significant differences. Alcohol usage, no significant differences. Now, economic well-being we saw it looked like women with unwanted pregnancy were slightly better off at age 53, which is not the opposite of what we had, that Amy thought would hold. We thought maybe the unwanted pregnancy would kind of drag women down, at least economically. So we decided to look at some potential mediators or the kind of variables that might explain this difference in income. So we looked at social measures of social participation. These are all at age 53. Job satisfaction, job stability, number of children, additional children beyond the first child from unwanted pregnancy, number of marriages, number of divorces. And we did see some significant effects with women with unwanted pregnancy had decreased job stability, increased additional children beyond the first one from unwanted pregnancy, and increased divorces. So like Amy thought these were all interesting findings. However, they didn't explain why women with unwanted pregnancy would have higher income, and if anything, they would seem to argue for lower income. So we kept looking at income, and then we found there was some information that kind of the income was broken down into aspects like income from wages, if you are self-employed, income from your own business, investments, public assistance. All of those were similar between the unwanted pregnancy and the controls. The one thing that was higher in the women with unwanted pregnancy was higher income from pensions, annuities, and survivors benefits. And anyway, Amy didn't really have an interpretation for this. We thought it maybe could be anomalous. We just decided it wasn't something we wanted to focus on our alpha on testing. We didn't think it was an interpretable, meaningful difference. So this is one thing EDA helped us on. We avoided spending on alpha on testing hypotheses we didn't consider of interest. But in exploring this, we found some interesting things. We found these variables that we do think are interesting to test: that unwanted pregnancy, decreased job stability, increased divorces. So here kind of are looking at the data lets one's mind wander creatively, and this is what I typically found when I explored data, you think of things you hadn't expected. And here's a quote from Percy Diaconis: "It is an empirical fact that using the tools of EDA to root about in large, rich collections of data leads to useful results." Another thing we can do with kind of the exploratory data is that we can choose our test statistics. So we can look at different test statistics and choose the one that looks like it's the best test statistic depends on the outcome, distribution of the outcomes. So we can look at the distribution of the outcomes. So here we're looking at like a Wilcoxon sign rank test, and then these are a class of test statistics that Paul Rosenbaum has proposed. These use statistics where what this means is you look at sort of 8 matched pairs at a time, and then you look at whether how many in the sort of fifth through you rank them from sort of lowest to highest absolute difference. And then the sort of the fifth, if the fifth is the eighth would be the highest, and the fifth would be the fifth going up from the lowest. You rank how many of those is the treated higher than the control. So it's kind of a generalization of the Wilcoxon sign rank test. So we chose among these different tests, we chose for each outcome that we're going to test, we chose the one that was most significant. So here's the overall plan we decided on. So we decided we were going to first just put all our 0.025 into testing depression. We thought that was kind of like the most important, meaningful outcome. And then we decided, okay, now if we're able to reject that, we're going to then split into 2 branches. One is going to look at divorces, unwanted pregnancy, having higher divorces, and additional children from unwanted pregnancy after the first. And then we're going to put 0.0125 into testing whether the unwanted pregnancy women have lower self-acceptance, sort of lower happiness with their life. And then if all these are rejected, we get to move on to the third step of testing whether there's decreased job stability among women with unwanted pregnancy. So that was our plan. Now I'm going to say less about Team B's plan because I wasn't involved in the EDA, but they did their EDA on the non-Catholics. They came up with a plan. They're going to first test the low positive subscale score of depression that's higher among women with unwanted pregnancy. If that was rejected, they're going to test whether there's effect modification in the low positive subscale by age. They found in their exploratory data analysis that there was more of an effect for women below their mid-20s. And then if both of those are rejected, they're going to test whether the overall depression is higher among women with unwanted pregnancy. So here's what happened. So our plan then gets applied to non-Catholic data. So we first tested for depression, and that was p-value was 0.0186, so it was rejected. So we get to move on to the next step. And then in the next step, so these would get rejected. Number of divorces, number of additional children from unwanted pregnancy would get rejected if they're below 0.00625. They both were. Self-acceptance would get rejected if it's below 0.0125. It was. So we got to reject all of these. And then finally, we got to move on to job stability, which was not rejected. For Team B's plan, unfortunately, it got stopped at the first step. The low positive subscale was not rejected in the Catholic. I mean, if they had gotten to test depression, overall depression was significant, but they didn't get to test that. So, okay. So I mean, overall, we basically have these 4 findings in for the non-Catholics. Yes.
There's one question in the question answer.
Okay. I'm not
I can read
seeing
out.
it. I'm not seeing what
Oh,
the
okay.
question. Oh,
So the
hang on,
question is like,
let me
actually,
check.
you already
Let me just
probably
check.
answered.
Vacuum. Okay.
So the question is like maybe this is something you already answered when you were talking, but like the question is, did the whole group see any data when identifying overall outcomes?
No, well, we didn't. No, well, we did do the matching together. So we looked at the covariates together. And I don't think we, we didn't we did look at the covariates together. And we may have, I think, in the outcomes, I can't sort of, we certainly didn't look at it with treated and control. We may have just looked at the distribution of some outcomes just to understand what they are, but we didn't. We didn't look at overall. The whole group didn't look at treated and control with the outcomes together.
Thank you.
So we found these 4 things on the non-Catholics. So just to compare to the other methods. So this is what automated cross-screening would do. So here we found 3. If you look at among those, so we had those like kind of 20 pre-specified outcomes, and the ones that were below 0.025 on the Catholic data were these 3. So then we do Bonferroni home with these 3, and we would find on the non-Catholics, and we'd find depression is higher among women with unwanted pregnancy. That's the only one that was significant. And then for the non-Catholics, there were 4 things. There were 4 things with p-value 0.025. So we test these 4 with Bonferroni home. Nothing is significant. So we'd only find depression among the non-Catholics. If you did home Bonferroni home with full data with just those 20 pre-specified outcomes, there were 2 things that were significant: depression and the low positive subscale score of depression. So overall, in this particular data, we found more with the 2-team cross screening than with either the automated cross screening or the Bonferroni home and the full data. Now, there's just one example. So not making general claims, but in this example, the EDA did seem, we discovered some hypotheses that we hadn't anticipated to test that we were able to test and find significant. I didn't talk about sensitivity analysis to unmeasured confounding, but it is something that can be incorporated into the analysis plans. The approach, I talked just about testing, but the approach can be used instead of doing testing, to form confidence intervals with simultaneous coverage. We weren't able to get replicability, and we thought about, how can we maybe improve our chances. It might be able to have more pre-discussion among the teams. So for example, actually, we considered, instead of testing overall depression, sort of creating a combination of our own combination of subscale scores, and Amy convinced us not to. She thought depression was the most meaningful thing to test. Apparently, they had the same discussion in the other group, but the statisticians prevailed and ended up testing just the low positive subscale scores. But Tishra was also sort of arguing for overall depression. So, had we been able to have that discussion in advance, maybe we at least could have came up with the same plan. Another thing, a pilot sample could be analyzed with both teams together before breaking the teams. That would be another approach that could maybe enhance replicability. I want to spend the last 5 minutes I have on talking about some work that Will Beckerman has been leading, that has, we call it we call them at data turnover, and it's sort of a one sample version of cross screening with EDA that has some of the advantages, but only involves one team. So what the method basically is, you still have break the data into 2 parts, A and B, but you pre-specify how part A of the data will be used to choose a 0.025 family-wise error plate for part B. So that's kind of like automated cross screening. But then for part B, you get to since you haven't looked at part A, you can use part B's. You can do EDA on part B to specify a plan for part A. So you get to at least do EDA on one part of the data. So let me just give so we call it data turnover. In a sense, you're kind of turning over the data on itself. You get to use EDA on part of the data, and all of the data contributes to the analysis. And so it's useful in a setting where maybe you don't have the manpower to have two teams, and you just want to have one team, but you still get to do some EDA. So we use this to study another question with the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study, which is the long-term effects of growing up with an alcoholic father on a person's outcomes later in life. And so the study design is we split the data sort of, again, to try to get replication. We looked at whether the person's father had a below high school education or high school education. So, I mean, this is, these are people growing up in 1950s Wisconsin. And so many fathers hadn't even graduated from high school then. And we thought there might be some different confounding with respect to whether your father's education level. And so then we matched on a bunch of potential confounders. And then we for the fathers with a high school education, that's the data set that we got to. We pre-specified a plan for how the fathers without a high school education would be used to specify what to analyze in the fathers with a high school education. And the fathers with a high school education, that's the thing we got to do EDA on. So the pre-specified plan was to look at these outcomes using Bonferroni Holmes, basically a measure of health, depression, income, a measure of kind of social relationships, times meaning family plus friends, and whether the person has an alcohol problem themselves. And this is when people are in their mid-50s. And we worked with, this is also with joint with Marina and Ruth, and with two alcohol researchers, Dave Oslin and Kevin Lynch. And then so in our exploration of the fathers with a high school education, we found some interesting things. For example, we found that this variable we pre-specified as sort of our social relationship, meeting family plus friends, appeared to increase with an alcoholic father, but enjoying conversations with family members and friends decreased significantly. So they didn't hang together. So we decided instead to look at a variable we found that, well, it might be interesting, closeness with a sibling. It wasn't something we hadn't anticipated, but we found it looked significant. It looked like it might sort of hang together as a more meaningful thing that could be affected by having an alcoholic father. And so we ended up finding some interesting we found a replicable finding in both data sets that your own alcohol use, people growing with alcoholic father have more of an alcohol problem in their 50s. We found effects on personal health, depression, number of illnesses, and this closeness with a sibling. And we think that's an interesting, our collaborators, alcohol collaborators, think that's an interesting result that hasn't been found before, and it was only discovered due to the EDA. So just in conclusion, Tukey said we need both exploratory and confirmatory. This work is trying to provide a method for doing exploratory and confirmatory data analysis on one data set. We have some archive links here, and just please email me if happy to provide papers or answer any questions. I'll leave it now to so Ying has some time for the discussion.
Thank you, Dylan. I think while Ying is preparing, I think there's one question on the question answer. Thoughts on how to adapt this interesting procedure to screen based on point estimates, magnitude, and sign rather than only binary significance?
That's a great question. So yeah, we actually, so you could do it with kind of focusing on point estimate. I was going to say, this sort of extra slide I had, so one could focus on kind of forming confidence intervals. So one thing you could do if you're not so much focused on controlling the simultaneous coverage, you could just sort of decide on interesting things in each thing that you're going to form confidence intervals for, and then at least the confidence intervals you form would all be marginally valid at it would be 95% confidence intervals. So had we done that with depression, we would have found interesting effects in both data sets. So you can kind of just you could explore and decide what interesting things to focus on, and then you could form confidence intervals. Yeah.
Thank you, Dylan. That's all questions we have right now. So, In?
Yeah, let me share my screen. Does it look good?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, thank you for having me here, and I'm excited to do this discussion for this very nice study. So just at a high level, from this nice study, I see an inspiring connection of multiple fields, which can be potentially very fruitful, namely causal inference, multiple testing, and replicability. And I think like each pair of them are connected in some way in the literature. For example, when connecting multiple testing and causal inference, there is a paper from Professor Taylor Vanderweel in 2017 on doing inference on multiple outcomes can be more reasonable and kind of easier to do than multiple exposures. So basically, we have multiple outcomes to look at. And on the other hand, when connecting causal inference with replicability, there is the very insightful work or framework by Professor Paul Rosenbaum on the evidence factor, on how you can use replication of a causal effect to establish more credible inference. So from this work, we see these three fields to join. So in this discussion, I will quickly re-summarize some context and challenges of this work, and summary of the approaches and the benefits. And if time permits, I'll briefly mention some additional thoughts on contextualizing this kind of subgroup replicability, and also enhancing this testing procedure, and potentially other ways to use diverse evidence from data. So let me begin with some contexts. So in a lot of cases, we don't have a single outcome and a single treatment to test. So like in this work, we have to test many outcomes, but we also have to ensure some error control for the final conclusion. But here, like the question is, the error budget doesn't allow us to test so many hypotheses with satisfactory power. So the solution by this work is that we can use exploratory data analysis to narrow down the list of hypotheses to test. So here are two concepts. The first is exploratory analysis, which is a liberal way of examining data. So basically, you can do everything with the data, and you can come up with a plan for subsequent analysis, which only test a subset of them. And after this, you can do confirmatory analysis. In contrast to the EDA, it is a more rigorous statistical testing. And in this process, we want to get strict error control. And the second challenge this study addresses is that generally we have hidden bias in observational studies. Even if the authors have done a good job in doing the risk set matching, there can still be some hidden factor that affects the result. So here in this work, the idea is that we can use replication to make our inference more reliable. So the idea is that if we have repeated rigorous findings from different data sets contexts, then the conclusion can be more credible. So these are all great things, but it's hard to have all these great things happen in one data set. So for example, the first is that it is hard to do both EDA and confirmatory analysis. So you cannot use your data to both do exploration to determine what to test, and use the same data to basically do the testing because of the double dipping bias. So the common practice in enabling both is to do sample splitting. So basically you randomly split the fold so that your data becomes independent and you can use the separate fold to get these two things. But here, the second question is how can we replicate with only one data set? Like we don't just want to do EDA and confirmatory, we also want replication. So the random split method I just mentioned does not work now because even if you can test it twice, it can still suffer from the same source of bias because your split is random. So in causal inference, Professor Rosenbaum proposed this very insightful framework of evidence factor. So the idea is that you can use the same data set to create multiple folds of independent evidence that may suffer from different sources of bias. And if they all suggest an interesting causal finding, because it is unlikely that all the hidden bias come into play, it is more likely that the discovery is truly causal. But the issue here is that to establishing evidence factors, people have to rely on strong structure in the data. So it usually have very limited applicability in many problems. So let me recap on what this approach does very briefly and restate why it is nice. So we begin with many hypotheses to test. Each hypothesis is associated with an outcome, and we're interested in whether the treatment has a causal effect on this specific outcome. The whole data set is split into two folds, but not randomly, but by Catholic and non-Catholic women data. So the first team will use the non-Catholic data to do EDA to come up with a plan to test a subset of hypotheses, and we see this subset as curly A. And symmetrically, team B will use the second fold of data from Catholic women, come up with a different plan to test another subset of hypotheses. And this is the EDA stage. On the second confirmatory stage, the team B will come here, still use the Catholic women data to carry out the plan A to test this hypothesis and reject a further subset of hypothesis of this curly A, which we denote as AB with family-wise error control 0.025. And symmetrically, team A will come here, use the non-Catholic women data, but carry out the plan B from team B to reject a further subset of hypothesis with family-wide error rate control. So it offers multiple things. First, if we look at the global null test, here the null is the effect is 0 in both groups. Then if you take any hypothesis that is in the union of these two sets, we have this global null test with family error rate control at 0.05 because of the union bound. So here, if a hypothesis is in this union list, it means that we are confident that the effect is non-zero in either group. So it's non-trivial in any case. And on the other hand, if we can find a hypothesis in the intersection of these two groups, they are kind of replicable findings that are non-zero in both groups. And we have family-wise error control below 0.05 in this list. And besides this kind of rigorous error control, there is also some kind of informal replicability. So if a finding is examined in both stages, they're kind of replicated because it is deemed as interesting by one group in the EDA and also another group in confirmatory. So we cannot establish formal statistical guarantees, but conceptually, this is kind of some replication. Okay, so here so why it is nice, again, I feel like the splitting by group approach is very clever. So it ensures the independence between the subgroups to make sure that we have validity of statistical inference, but also preserving the flexibility of exploratory analysis. And the benefit of EDA is that it allows for curiosity and dynamic judgment, as Dylan has introduced in the talk. And also it narrows down the hypothesis list so that your error budget in the next stage can focus on potentially interesting hypotheses. And also in the EDA, we can explore the choice of test statistics to use in the next stage so that we can have more powerful individual tests. And of course, in contrast to random split, this subgroup splitting offers multiple folds of evidence to support replicability, which is pretty nice. So when thinking about this subgroup replicability in the causal context, the idea is that if we have replication in distinct data sets, this reduces the concern of bias. But a natural reflection is that I can feel some tension between subgroup replicability and heterogeneous treatment effect. So here in HTE, the belief is that different people can react differently to an intervention. And this is meaningful in contexts like medicine, so that different people can choose medicines that are effective to individuals. So here, if we can find treatment effect only in one group, it is not clear whether it is a lack of replicability or just an artifact of heterogeneity in the treatment effect. So I can see some tension in this aspect. But on the other hand, I feel like there can be some settings where these two things can be reconciled when you want subgroup replicability as a sensible criterion for uniformly deployed policies for the sake of fairness or safety. So in some case, you want to make sure that a treatment is effective for all the groups that you're going to implement them, instead of looking for heterogeneous treatment effect. So in this case, the question becomes, if it is really something to pursue, should we optimize it as a criterion? So the things become a little bit tricky because in this framework, the EDAs are kind of freestyle, and they have to lead to the same set of hypotheses to make them to be able to be replicable. So here, the risk is that perhaps if they deviate too much, no hypothesis has the chance to be replicated because they just do not appear in both test plan. And here, if our goal is truly to optimize replicability, a potential alternative of the estimate is to look at the minimum of the group-wise average treatment effect. And correspondingly, an alternative strategy is to random split a small subset of the data to jointly do EDA on the first fold to narrow down the hypothesis, and on the remaining of the data, we concentrate all the budget to confirm subgroup replicability. Of course, the promise is that we can concentrate the error budget, but also we lose the opportunity to judge replicability against the variability in research teams. How much time do I have? Let me just be quick. And also, in doing this if we do not focus on replicability, we only look at the global null testing, meaning that we want to discover as many hypotheses as possible. In the EDA, we have to pick the hypothesis that will sustain in the second examination. So more specifically, in the exploratory analysis stage, we will, for example, construct some estimator and determine whether to look at it in the second stage. And in the second stage, we do the same thing. We get another estimator and see whether it is large enough. So here the point is that for a hypothesis to be rejected, it is not just how significant the first estimator is, but also whether the second estimator will be significant. So here, it means that the EDA needs to be mindful of whether the second test on this hypothesis will be significant. And I believe there can be some tricks in doing so. For example, we can predict the hypothesis in the second fold. Instead of looking at the p-value, we can also look at sensitivity analysis to look at the potential robustness of this hypothesis and potentially do some predictive inference for the second estimator, or look at the distributional robustness of this conclusion. And the second thought is that we can systematically use the first stage information instead of just doing a very free EDA. For example, we can look at some liberal preliminary error criterion. We can do some post-selection inference. And if we want to better judge whether the same hypothesis will emerge in the second fold, we can consider some principles like optimism, pessimism in the face of uncertainty. And finally, just a very brief comment because I don't have very concrete suggestions. So in this work, the authors use diversity on the analysis side to create the opportunity to examine replicability. A second thought would be also to diversify on the dataset side, because so it is emphasized that this dataset is very unique and we are limited to this one dataset, but there can potentially be other conceptually similar dataset that can provide some ideas for the for at least the EDA stage, or some dataset related to subset of information. For example, some partial outcomes related to this dataset to provide some side information for ordering the hypothesis. So these are all my points for the discussion, and I wanted to thank Dylan again for the very inspiring work and talk.
Thank you, Ying and Dylan. So we are now out of time, but if Dylan would like to chat a little bit about Ying's discussion, that would be welcome, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ying, for a great, a very inspiring discussion. Yeah, I think it's a great point about the idea of kind of having two different data sets. I think that's a very rich idea. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the point about the heterogeneous effects and subgroups, that's a great point. I mean, in some settings, I guess hope for sort of that there might, even though there might be heterogeneous effects, that if there's no qualitative interaction. In other words, if there's quantitative interaction means there's a different effect in groups, but it's the same sign. If that qualitative interaction means there's a different sign, there's a positive in one, negative in the other. So if the same sign in both groups, at least you'd hope for replicability in that sense. But as you said, the power might be affected, and it would be good to develop methods for sort of thinking about how to plan the analysis based on the EDA, based on power considerations.
Great. Thank you. All right, I'll share my ending screen and we'll wrap. Okay, so thanks again to Dylan and Ying for nice talks and discussion. Thank you to all people who asked questions, and of course the rest of the organizers here. Next week, we'll have on April 8th, we'll have a talk by Nathan Kalush from Cornell. And so I hope you all join us for that. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Yeah, good to see you all again. And yeah, very nice, very interesting talk. I've